Welcome into Buccaneers Insider Live, presented by Miller Lite. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, and we are basically a week away from the start of training camp.
Less than
technically. So yeah, I mean, there'll be the rookies coming in early, QB
Saturday,
school,
yeah.
all of that. So we are in the thick of it finally.
It's here.
It's here after a whole off season. Prognosticating, speculating, discussing. We're finally going to have tangible things to talk about. This is our last show before we feel like we have a little bit more to discuss. So we've talked about every angle of this Bucs team this offseason, and you had the brilliant idea of in this show. Brilliant idea. Yep, that might be the first time in 7 years together that
yes,
I've said this.
I don't remember that word.
I know, I take it back.
Okay.
So that Scott suggested we talk about the other teams in the NFC South, kind of get a
what's going to be their big deal in training camp?
Yes, that what are we going to look at for their training camp, the things that are going to be interesting to keep an eye on for those matchups. And it does feel so interesting this year after it felt like a lot of continuity in a lot of different ways with those teams of what you knew to expect, and some of the familiar faces for years and years are gone.
Right.
And so let's look at this. First of all, Carolina.
Well, we have a few things to talk about first, don't we?
Well, I guess that's true. Before we get into that now, as we had planned for this, we had planned for this to mean that there was going to be no Bucs.
We didn't think there was going to be any Bucs.
It's supposed to be that dead time of year, and then they just shook things up for us. Now there are reports out there. This is where we always have to on this show. It's a little interesting because there's been nothing officially reported, but there are reports out there about something happening recently.
Yes, if we were to confirm any of this, then it would be as if the Buccaneers were confirming it. So we can't do that. The Buccaneers have not said anything, but there are reports that the Buccaneers are signing tight end Kyle Rudolph.
Which you
last week we talked about this. So we talked about the fact there was one open spot on the roster, that the tight end position was lacking in experience behind Cam Brate with Rob Gronkowski retiring, and we mentioned 5 possible names of veterans that are still out there, and I think I said the one that seemed like the best fit was Kyle Rudolph because he's a proven good blocker, so he can be your Y inline tight end, and he also has a pretty good history of adding in the receiving game. He was with the Jets last year, maybe not as utilized as much as expected when he signed there, but he's had 2 Pro Bowl seasons, had some good years in Minnesota, and I think it's just in the last 3 years, the Bucs have a really good track record of bringing in veteran pass catchers who have done a good job of contributing. So if this proves to be true, which we expect it probably will, I think it's a good addition.
And now, what do you think this is going to mean for the other tight ends that are on the roster right now? I know that recently we've talked a lot about rookies like Cade Otton and Ko Kieft, and then we know Cam Brate's on the roster, and Cody McElroy, and what all is this going to look like? So how does bringing in Kyle Rudolph potentially affect all this?
I think it just gives you that option. You got a guy that's proven, basically. So, I know they hope that Cade Otton, who didn't really get to practice in the offseason as he recovered from his injury from last year, I know that they vision and view him as a potential 3-down tight end, the guy that already showed that he can block and is a willing blocker in college, but can add in the passing game, and he might be the guy who ends up being your primary inline tight end. But if that doesn't work out, or it doesn't work out right away, then you have Kyle Rudolph, who's another good option. And remember, when we're talking about tight ends, you think of it as like a depth chart of Cam Brate and Kyle Rudolph, but there's a lot of snaps where you have 2 tight ends on the field. So knowing how good Cam Brate is in 2 tight end sets as a pass catcher, especially in the red zone, I think even though this means Rob Gronkowski retiring means a lot more for Cam Brate, that's still true with Kyle Rudolph in the mix.
Okay, all right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at those.
Well, one more thing before we do that.
I love this.
Last week, somebody asked a question at the end about who I thought would make the team as receivers, and I was going through the options behind like the top 3, and I kept saying, I know I'm forgetting one name.
Yeah, we both couldn't come up with it.
I wanted to bring that back up because the name I couldn't think of at the moment was Cyril Grayson, and I didn't want to leave him out of the mix because when you're talking about Scotty Miller, Brashad Perryman, Tyler Johnson, I think Cyril Grayson's right there in that same mix, and easily could be one that emerges from that group, considering how strongly he finished last year. And he played a lot of the Chris Godwin role when he was in there, when Chris was out. He's not as big as Chris Godwin. He's probably can't be as good of a blocker as Chris Godwin, but he's very willing, and the coaches like that a lot. Okay, now we can get to it.
Now we can get to it. Now that we've teased it 18 times. No, that was great. So we're going to start off with Carolina, biggest questions or intrigue going into training camp.
That one's easy. That one's easy. It's obviously the quarterback situation. It took a while, but they traded for Baker Mayfield from the Browns, and they were able to do it for just like a 5th-round pick that could become a 4th-round pick, and they don't even have to pay most of his salary. He's probably going to be the starter, but I know they're going to go into camp saying it's a competition between Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold, who hilariously are respectively the first and third picks in the 2018 draft, ending up on the same team 4 years later. It's weird, right? These are what they did last year. You can see the numbers are pretty similar. Baker won more games. The problem for Sam Darnold essentially was interceptions. You see that 9-13 ratio isn't real good. He started off the year really well, was running a lot, adding with his legs, and they won, I think, their first 3 games, but it kind of went downhill from there. Both of these guys had injury issues. Baker Mayfield had a really bad injury to his non-throwing shoulder, and then Sam Darnold had a concussion, and then I think also a shoulder injury. So it's a little hard to judge them on just these numbers because there are extenuating factors. Neither guy had really a great season last year. If of the two of them, Baker Mayfield is a guy that at least has had a couple of stretches of really nice play in his career. Okay, and now let's move on to Atlanta. There's multiple things that are going to be new and different there, but one in particular you wanted to focus on for training camp. Well, the receivers. Julio Jones is long gone at this point. Calvin Ridley is suspended for at least this year. Russell Gage is now with the Buccaneers. So I want them to go ahead and put up this graphic of probably the top 5 names you'd recognize, because I want to see if you can pronounce the first guy there. Olamide? And the last name? You'd think it's Zacchaeus, but that makes me think... That's close. It's Olamide Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus. Olamide Zacchaeus. I should have known that whatever I thought it was, it wouldn't be that. That's basically their top returning receiver with his 31 catches last year. You see, they drafted Drake London. Those numbers look great, but that's from USC, so you don't know how soon a rookie's going to make a big impact. Although he was the first rookie, and it was a loaded draft, so they obviously thought he was the best one. He's a big guy. He's great on contested catches, but also makes plays all over the field. He's really a more well-rounded receiver than some of the scouting reports gave him credit for. Brian Edwards, I think they got him in a trade with the Raiders, and Demir Bird and Auden Tate. I mean, these are the top 5 guys on their depth chart. Kyle Pitts is probably the great tight end, may be their top pass catcher, but among the receivers, this is what they were making a receiving core out of it. And it's just, to me, it could work out great, but there's a lot of question marks. A lot of question marks there. All right, and then New Orleans as well. New Orleans every year, even with Drew Brees gone and now Sean Payton gone, at some point you expect them to go, okay, we're rebuilding. Right. Because they've been just, working the edges of the salary cap for year after year after year, deferring cap space and money down the road, and every year you think this is the year, and they're still going for it, okay? Right, yeah. Obviously there's intrigue at quarterback because it's Jameis Winston, and he was playing pretty well last year before he got injured, unfortunately, in a game against the Buccaneers. But to me, and they have some interesting issues at receiver as well, but to me, the 2 big things for the Saints are the fact that they don't have Teron Armstead anymore, so they're going to have a new left tackle, and they drafted a guy in the first round, Trevor Penning, Northern Iowa. Is he going to be able to step in right away? But really, the far more intriguing spot is safety. They had a pair of really good veteran safeties last year in Malcolm Jenkins and Marcus Williams. Well, Malcolm Jenkins retires. Marcus Williams gets a big new contract in Baltimore, and he's a great safety, a big center fielder. He's a great safety, a big center fielder, and I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry here. And to lose him, you'd think that's a big deal, right? And then you think, well, the Saints, okay, they have a lot of really good players on every level of their defense. Demario Davis, Cameron Jordan. And you think, okay, maybe they'll have some weakness in Marshawn Lattimore, cornerback. Maybe they'll have some weakness at the back end. And then they go out and they get Marcus May from the Jets, and they sign later in the offseason after a lot of rumors about where he might go. They land Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger. I mean, that's a really good response to losing your 2 really good safeties, is bring 2 really good ones back in. And Tyrann Mathieu is really an intriguing guy. You can line him up all over the field. Probably their best safety now, and he's different than Marcus Williams, who's just a really great rangy free safety type. Tyrann Mathieu is more like a put him everywhere strong safety, slot, in the box. And Marcus May is a nice, he's a former first round pick. He was hurt a little bit last year and only played in 6 games, as you saw there. But the production that they had from their safeties last year, they've done a really good job of replacing it. Okay, we got a couple questions here. Our first one is from Carlos, who asks, how is the O-line looking to protect our, he calls out the age of the QB, but you know what? No matter what, you want an O-line that's protecting. Yeah, but that's only going to be true for about another week. I know, he's about to be 45. August 3rd, something like that. Well, I mean, listen, the offensive line last year was maybe the best in the NFL. By the numbers, the Buccaneers threw the most passes in the league, so they were very stressed in pass protection, and yet they finished the league with the lowest number of sacks per pass play. That's a fantastic performance, and everybody recognized it because we put 3 guys in the Pro Bowl, right? So you're starting obviously from a good place. If you ask us how they're looking right now, you can't tell.
Right.
I mean, the OTAs, no pads on, no contact. Who knows?
Right.
But if you're talking about theoretically, how does it look on paper? I think it's pretty good. You still have Donovan Smith, who was not a Pro Bowl last year and has never been a Pro Bowler, and I think that's because, as we have said many times, there's a bit of a disconnect about how valuable the Buccaneers think he is and his reputation around the league. I think he had his best year yet last year. He's an Iron Man. He almost never misses a snap, and according to PFF, he allowed 1 sack all year.
It's incredible.
So, this idea that Donovan Smith might be the weak link, I think we need to get rid of that. I think he's a very good and very dependable left tackle. Then you have Ryan Jensen, who was a Pro Bowler, some consider now the best center in the league, and you have Tristan Wirfs, who was an Associated Press first team All-Pro, which means the voters believe he's one of the 2 best tackles in the entire league, and he's only 23 years old. He's only going to get better.
Yeah.
So you're really good at 3 of the spots at least, and then you respond to Alex Kappa signing somewhere else by trading for Shaq Mason for a 5th-round pick, and he's regarded as one of the better guards in the league. So he slides right in there at right guard. So really the only question is left guard, replacing the retired Ali Marpet, who was one of those 3 Pro Bowlers. And that's great for Ali. I think he's in love in life, and we're all happy for him. But you can't objectively say that's a good thing for the Buccaneers, that your Pro Bowl left guard retires. But I think there's a good plan in place. There's a lot of options. Aaron Stinney, we know what he did in the playoffs in the Super Bowl year. He is probably the front runner, but he's going to get a lot of competition from the 2nd-round pick, Luke Gedeke. And then you've even got guys like Robert Hainsey and Nick Leverett. So there's a lot of possibilities there, and I think they're going to end up with one really good starter. So overall, it looks about as good as it did last year, and last year was great.
Okay. Rick said, if there's one more position that may need more depth before training camp, what would it be?
To me, I think I've answered this before, and one of them was tight end, which apparently we think. So the other one is inside linebacker. You've got your 2 great starters in Levante David and Devin White. For the last 3 years, the main replacement, the main reserve behind them, who would come in if either one was hurt, was Kevin Minter, who was a experienced veteran who was familiar with the Bucs defense from his time in Arizona, who really knew what he was doing, right? He's not around anymore, and so your backups there are KJ Britt, probably the number 1 guy, and Grant Stewart, 2 draft picks from last year who barely played at all last year, and then a couple of undrafted guys. That's it.
Yeah.
There's 4 guys, and they have between them about 30 defensive snaps in the NFL. So KJ Britt may be great. I mean, I know the Buccaneers are hoping he develops into a starter in the long run, and he fills that Kevin Minter role to perfection this year, but you can't say that you know that. And so you don't have a single experienced guy behind your two starters. And we've seen over the last couple of years, I don't think that Levante has made it through any of the last few years without missing a game or 2. So at some point, it's the likelihood that somebody other than those 2 is going to have to take some snaps, and right now that's KJ Britt. Now, that's a great plan, and I hope that's what happens, but it wouldn't kill me if we found a veteran on the street to give you a little insurance.
Okay. And then related, James asked, do you think they're content with their edge rushers, or could they be looking for a veteran to add to the roster?
If you asked Jason Light or Todd Bowles this question, I know exactly what they say. We like the guys that we have. We have a lot of high expectations for like Joe Tryon-Shank, and Anthony Nelson played really well for us last year, but we're always keeping our eyes open, and if there is an option out there that fits for us and we can make it work, then we'll always look to improve every position. So that's what they will say. But I think they're okay. You know what I'm saying? I know there's no JPP anymore, but really the Buccaneers were operating without him for most of the second half last year anyway. That's not to say he had a great, 4-year run? Great 4-year run. That was proved to be a really good trade. So, and more power to him. I hope he continues on somewhere else. I don't think he's signed anywhere. I know he talked to Baltimore. But I think they're confident that Joe Tryon-Shank, especially because he gets to focus on one job this year instead of all the stuff he was doing last year, that he had 4 sacks last year. Hopefully he can be a 7 or 8 sack guy. You feel good about Shaq. He's had 10 sacks basically every year since he's got here. And then Anthony Nelson's been good. They drafted the guy, Andre Anthony, in the 7th round. Cam Gill has shown some some ability. He just hasn't had a ton of playing time. So I would think with those 5, they feel pretty good about that unit, but you always keep your eyes open.
Okay, and we'll close with this one. Delvin said, do you see Jaelon Darden having a breakout year or even a better year than last year?
Yeah, it could be the latter without being the former. I mean, there's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of room for bigger plays in the return game, some splash plays. I think he had 1 or 2, but I think the Bucs were hoping he'd be more of a dynamic force in that regard. So he'll be coming into camp trying to win that job again. There are some other options, but I think everybody would love it if he won that job again and gave you some big plays. And then on offense, really didn't play a ton. I think he had 6 catches. I think in the playoffs when we had some injuries at the position, he had 3 snaps, I think, in the 2 playoff games. So, you know, there's obviously room for improvement on offense. There were good reports out of OTAs from some of the other guys saying he really looks comfortable in the offense now. Like last year, he dropped right in the offseason, and they liked the way he looked. He was fluid. He just looked good in his routes, but he didn't really know the offense. So put the 2 things together. Hopefully he hits the ground running in training camp and has a bigger year.
Okay, well that's going to do it for us on this edition of Buccaneers Insider Live presented by Miller Lite. Thanks as always for joining us. We'll see you next week.